You think you know the McDonald's hot coffee lawsuit. The media narrative painted Stella Liebeck as a greedy litigant, getting $2.7 million for a spilled cup. But the actual jury award was complex, ultimately totaling over $600,000 for degree burns that required skin grafts. This wasn't some minor scald. It was a severe injury, and it exposed a critical, documented pattern of corporate behavior that most people never hear about. The truth of Liebeck v. McDonald's isn't about a woman who couldn't handle hot coffee. It's about product liability, corporate negligence, and what happens when profit margins override consumer safety. We'll unpack the evidence presented at trial, the legal arguments, and the surprising details that led a jury to side with Mrs. Liebeck. And by the end, you'll understand exactly how this case changed the legal landscape for product safety, and why it matters to your rights as a consumer. When most people hear hot coffee lawsuit, they immediately think of Stella Liebeck, the woman who sued McDonald's over a cup of spilled coffee and in the public imagination became the poster child for frivolous litigation. What many don't realize is that the jury originally awarded Ms. Liebeck nearly $3 million, not for a minor burn, but for injuries so severe they required skin grafts, and not simply because the coffee was hot, but because McDonald's corporate policy mandated serving coffee at a temperature far exceeding industry standards. This isn't just a story about a spilled drink. It's a pivotal case in product liability law that fundamentally reshaped how courts view corporate responsibility and consumer safety. Before Liebeck, the legal landscape surrounding product temperature and warning labels was significantly different. This case, decided in 1994 by a New Mexico jury, delved deep into the nuances of negligence, proximate cause, and the often misunderstood concept of punitive damages. We'll examine the specific temperature McDonald's maintained its coffee, the documented prior incidents of similar severe burns, and how the legal arguments unfolded, revealing a story far more complex than the popular narrative suggests. Let's begin by understanding the incident itself, which occurred on February 27, 1992. Despite the popular image, Stella Liebeck was a 79-year-old grandmother, not a reckless thrill-seeker, and her initial request for compensation was remarkably modest. It was January 1992, and Ms. Liebeck, a passenger in her grandson Cristiano's parked Ford Probe in Albuquerque, New Mexico, was attempting to add cream and sugar to her McDonald's coffee. The cup, held between her knees, tipped, spilling its contents onto her lap. The immediate result was horrifying. Degree burns across 6% of her body, including her inner thighs, groin, and buttocks. Court records describe the agonizing medical ordeal that followed. An 8-day hospital stay, multiple sessions of debridement to remove dead tissue, and painful skin grafts. Her recovery extended over 2 years, with documented medical expenses totaling over $10,000. Ms. Liebeck initially sought a settlement of just $20,000 from McDonald's to cover these mounting medical costs, a sum barely above her documented expenses. She was not demanding millions, but simply an acknowledgement and aid for her injuries. What would prompt McDonald's to reject such a seemingly reasonable offer? But how did a seemingly simple offer for a minor burn escalate into a landmark legal battle? Despite suffering full-thickness burns, requiring extensive medical treatment including debridement and skin grafts, Ms. Liebeck's initial request to McDonald's was for just $20,000 to cover her documented medical expenses. McDonald's response was, to put it mildly, dismissive. They offered a mere $800. This stark contrast between Ms. Liebeck's documented costs and McDonald's offer highlighted a critical detail: the temperature of their coffee. According to court records and expert testimony, McDonald's corporate policy mandated that their coffee be held at a temperature between 180 and 190 degrees Fahrenheit. For context, typical home-brewed coffee is usually around 130 to 150 degrees. At 180–190 degrees, coffee can cause a degree burn in just 2 to 7 seconds of exposure. Indeed, Dr. David Caruso, a burn expert, testified that these temperatures were known to cause such injuries rapidly. In contrast, many other restaurants served coffee at a safer 140 to 160 degrees, where even prolonged contact would be less likely to result in degree burns. What did McDonald's know about the dangers of their product? What many didn't realize was that McDonald's had a long and documented history of similar incidents, dating back years before Stella Liebeck ever spilled her coffee. According to court records, in the decade leading up to Ms. Liebeck's incident, McDonald's had received over 700 prior complaints of severe burns from their coffee, with many customers suffering degree burns that required skin grafts. Despite this significant pattern of injury, internal company policy explicitly maintained their coffee temperature at 180 to 190 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature range that, according to expert testimony presented by the prosecution, could cause degree burns in just 2 to 7 seconds. During the trial, a McDonald's quality assurance manager, Christopher Appleton, conceded under oath that the company was aware of the burn risk and that their coffee was too hot to be served. The rationale, as argued by the defense, was to maintain coffee freshness for longer periods, prioritizing shelf life over a reduction in burn potential. This systematic knowledge of the danger, coupled with their refusal to modify the temperature, would become a central point for the jury. So, what exactly did the jury decide was the true cost of McDonald's hot coffee policy? So, after hearing about McDonald's extensive history of prior burn complaints, how did a jury in Albuquerque respond to Stella Liebeck's case? After weighing the evidence, including expert testimony on the extreme temperature of the coffee and McDonald's documented knowledge of the burn risk, the jury delivered a stunning verdict on August 18, 1994. They found McDonald's 80% responsible for Ms. Liebeck's injuries and assigned her 20% of the fault for the spill itself. In terms of compensatory damages, which are intended to cover actual losses, the jury initially awarded Ms. Liebeck $200,000. However, due to her 20% comparative negligence, this amount was reduced to $160,000. But the jury didn't stop there. They then awarded a staggering $2.7 million in punitive damages against McDonald's. These punitive damages were not about compensating Ms. Liebeck, but rather about punishing McDonald's for what the jury deemed willful, wanton, and reckless behavior. The amount was intentionally calculated to send a clear message. It represented approximately 2 days' worth of McDonald's coffee sales at the time. Yet the story didn't end with this verdict, as legal maneuvering was just beginning. Despite the jury's verdict, why does the hot coffee case remain one of the most misunderstood legal battles in American history, often portrayed as a frivolous lawsuit by a greedy plaintiff? The truth behind the $3 million coffee myth reveals a deliberate campaign of misinformation. While the jury initially awarded Ms. Liebeck $160,000 in compensatory and $2.7 million in punitive damages, Judge Robert H. Scott later reduced the punitive damages to $480,000, bringing the total award to $640,000. Ultimately, Ms. Liebeck and McDonald's settled out of court for an undisclosed, significantly lower amount. This disparity was largely obscured by tort reform advocates who weaponized the case, portraying Ms. Liebeck as opportunistic and the verdict as excessive. Yet, what often goes unmentioned is the lasting impact. In the years following the verdict, McDonald's quietly lowered the temperature of its coffee by approximately 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Stella Liebeck's lawsuit was not about becoming wealthy. It was about holding a multinational corporation accountable for a product that knowingly caused severe harm, ultimately improving product safety for countless future customers. A critical outcome, the sensationalized, frivolous lawsuit narrative consistently overlooks. Liebeck's injuries, attributing the remaining 20% to her. This breakdown led to Ms. Liebeck receiving $160,000 in compensatory damages, reduced by her 20% fault to $128,000. But the jury's decision didn't stop there. They also awarded a significant sum for punitive damages, $2.7 million. This figure, as specified in the verdict, was calculated to represent 2 days' worth of McDonald's coffee revenue at the time. Section, The Truth They Don't Want You to Know, a legacy of misinformation. Despite the jury's verdict, why does the hot coffee case remain one of the most misunderstood legal battles in American history, often portrayed as a frivolous lawsuit by a greedy plaintiff? The truth behind the $3 million coffee myth reveals a deliberate campaign of misinformation. While the jury initially awarded Ms. Liebeck $160,000 in compensatory and $2.7 million in punitive damages, Judge Robert H. Scott subsequently reduced the punitive damages to $480,000, bringing the total award to $640,000. The parties later settled out of court for an undisclosed confidential amount, meaning Ms. Liebeck never received the widely reported $3 million. This narrative, largely driven by corporate interests and media misrepresentation, effectively obscured the jury's actual findings regarding corporate negligence and its pattern of conduct. The case prompted McDonald's to adjust its coffee temperature, although no specific regulatory changes were mandated. The Liebeck v. McDonald's case thus stands as a crucial lesson in how public perception can be fundamentally shaped by narrative, often distorting factual court findings. It illustrates the critical role of our justice system in holding corporations accountable, even when faced with significant efforts to undermine a legitimate claim. This was not a story of frivolous litigation, but one concerning a jury's careful assessment of documented corporate behavior. Have you ever encountered a situation where the widely accepted story about a legal case clashed with the documented facts? Share your observations in the comments below. For more in-depth explorations of landmark legal cases and their societal impact, make sure to subscribe. If you found this breakdown insightful, you'll definitely want to watch my analysis of the legal precedents set by the Tylenol tampering cases next. This video presents publicly documented information. It is for educational purposes, not legal advice.